Chapter 16. Mud stopped in the common room and helped himself to what remained of dinner. The tender roast warmed his stomach, but could not feed his frustration with the aesthetic at the library. His left hand rested against a small bundle in his shirt while he devoured the candy carrots. With the proper tools he could gain access to anything. His anger succumbed to new excitement. Forget the public section. If he had to lock a door, it might as well be into the main library itself. Chuckling, he headed up to his room. He opened the door and found Drake Cutter sitting in front of the fireplace, sharpening his dagger. Firelight glinted off the shiny steel. Mud sucked in a sharp breath. He'd left Hera alone with the dwarf. Set-Eye's description of a draconian knife in the bag rushed into Mud's thoughts. Fearing for Hera's safety, he drew his sword and lunged into the room toward Drake Cutter. Drake Cutter jumped to his feet, ready to deflect Mud's blow with a dagger. "Mud!" Hera's startled exclamation stopped Mud. She sat unharmed on the edge of the bed by the kender. Mud lowered his sword. His face grew hot with embarrassment. Hera and Drake Cutter glared at him, waiting for some kind of an explanation. Mud cleared his throat and chuckled. "Sorry, I thought I saw a draconian. It must have been the shadows from the fire." He sheathed his sword and went over to Hera. "How is your little friend?" "Still unconscious. I bought some clothes from him out in the market." A tiny pair of brown trousers and a forest green shirt lay on the bed, along with a heavy leather vest, a cloak, a sturdy pair of boots, and a set of small daggers. Mud rested a hand on the kender's bony arm. He was glad Hera had saved him, but Mud pulled his hand back. "You thought of everything, I see." Mud gestured towards the clothes. "Do we have any steel left?" "Enough to pay for the inn. Don't worry, I'm not stupid. But it's cold out this time of year. He needs warm clothes." She brushed her fingers across the kender's brow. The kender stirred, blinked, and looked up at Hera. "It's all right," Hera cooed. "You're safe. I didn't let that rotten cleric throw you in prison." The kender stiffened, and his hand fumbled for the medallion around his neck. You shouldn't speak that way about a revered son of Eli, even if he is a blundering human fool." The kender bit his lip and fell silent. Hera giggled and straightened the covers over the kender. "Who's Eli? Some god? I've never heard of him." The kender frowned and sat up. "You never heard of Eli? The supreme leader of all the gods of good? The creator of the high and chosen race of Sylvanesti elves?" "I think he means Paladine, Hera," Mud said. "I've heard that the elves call him Eli." He sank into a chair next to the table and pulled out the drawing of the stone door. Somewhere in the great library there had to be a reference to where it was hidden. "Oh, Paladine! Of course I know him." Hera patted the kender's shoulder, oblivious to the look of annoyance the kender gave her for doing it. "My name's Hera, by the way, and this is Mud and Drake Cutter. We told Reverend Son Brigham we'd look after you while he went back to the temple and got everything worked out. I'm sure Reverend Son Elliston will speak up for you." The kender slithered out of the bed and straightened his tattered robes. "I thought so once, but now I'm not so sure. I have been cursed. I had hoped Elliston could reverse it, but they won't even let me talk to him. No one will listen to a kender, and why should they? Kender are no more than thieving pestilence that cause disorder wherever they go." He frowned. His little hands balled into tight fists. Mud laid the parchment on the table and peered at the kender. He'd never known anyone to talk about his own race that way. It set Mud's nerves on edge. "Hera has told you who we are," Mud said. "Why don't you tell us who you are, and what you were doing with that constellation?" The kender puffed out his chest and lifted his chin. "I am Eridan Jaliston Eladorian, son of Erelus Carelessness, Eladorian of House He cut off mid-sentence and his face turned deep red. "Just call me Eridan." "All right, Eridan," Drake Cutter growled. "Why'd you steal that constellation?" "I didn't steal it." Eridan's voice rose to a high squeak. "I was just looking at it, and Bregan started after me. I couldn't drop it or it would have been dashed to pieces. I couldn't let him catch me because he wouldn't listen to me, and he would have thrown me in prison. That's why I gave it to Mud." Eridan shook with anger. "Leave him alone," Hera told Mud and Drake Cutter. "Can't you see he's been through enough already? He doesn't need you two hounding him." Hera scooped up the bundle of clothes and handed them to Eridan. "There's a bath for you in the other room, and here are some new clothes. When you're done you can eat. I saved plenty of food for you." "You want me to wear these?" he cried in dismay. Hera stepped back, looking hurt. "I used all the extra steel I had to buy them for you. I wanted you to be warm." Aridin dropped his gaze to the clothes and fingered the material. He opened his mouth to say something, paused, and then closed it again. "Thank you," he finally blurted out, then flung himself into the adjoining room and closed the door. Drake Cutter grunted and came over to the table where Mud sat with the parchment. "Did you find anything at the library?" Mud grimaced. "It's closed for spring cleaning." Hera dropped onto the bed. "It can't be!" she cried. "Mud, we'll have to go back tomorrow morning. If we tell them about the Red Dragon and Shannara, they'll have to help us. Anyone can see how important this is." "Of course we'll go back," Mud said, running his fingers along the runes in the picture. The dried ink tickled his fingertips, but he intended to go to the library far sooner than morning. A plate of food sat on the table along with a flagon of punch. Mud reached for it while he puzzled over the picture. "Hands off!" Hera slapped Mud's finger. "That food's for Aridin. You already ate." Mud half smiled. This new Kender often made him remember the times he spent with his old friend Sindri. Sindri had shared Mud's enthusiasm for life and love of adventure. This Kender, the only other Kender Mud had met, didn't seem as energetic as Sindri. After long minutes of just staring at the picture, Mud leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "If we could just read these awful runes." "What runes?" Aridin stood in the doorway, washed and dressed, running his fingers through his hopelessly tangled hair. "Nothing." Mud reached for the parchment to fold it and put it away, but Hera picked it up first. "These runes," she said, holding out the picture. "We've got to find this door, but we don't know what this says." Aridin took the parchment from Hera and studied it for a moment. "These are draconic runes. It's seldom that any race other than the dragons get a chance to see them. Certainly the dragons don't go around sharing them with humans and dwarves. How did you come by this?" Drake Cutter growled and snatched the drawing from Aridin. "What do you know, Dragon's Kinder? This is none of your affair. We saved your miserable life. That doesn't give you the right to insult us." Mud stood and held out his hand to Drake Cutter. "Give me the picture," he said, trying not to sound testy. He trusted it in Drake Cutter's hands even less than Aridin's. Drake Cutter passed it to Mud and stomped back over to sit by the fire. Mud folded the parchment and stuffed it in his pocket. "Ignore Drake Cutter," Hera said. "His father has been badly injured and might die soon if we don't find that door quickly. And the holy woman from my village has been taken by a red dragon. This door is the only chance we have of finding." "Hera!" Mud shouted before she could tell Aridin about the dragon pendant. It was bad enough they had to bring Drake Cutter along. Hera put her hands on her hips, but Aridin spoke before she could start an argument with Mud. "I get the idea. Something valuable lies behind the door. I'm not going to try and steal it, I promise you. Since you have helped me, I will tell you what the runes say." Mud listened begrudgingly. Kender tended to travel widely. If somewhere Aridin had learned to draconic runes, so much the better. "You may be disappointed, though. They don't give direction to the door's location." Aridin raised his arm in a regal gesture that might have looked magnificent if made by an elf, but seemed laughable for a Kender. "The runes inscribed above the doorway say, 'Only the true heart may pass.'" End of chapter 16.